My dear friends, imagine if I told you that your entire life, every success, every failure, every moment of struggle or triumph, is nothing more than a game. A game with specific rules that, once you understand them, guarantee your victory every single time. This isn't some modern theory that will fade with time. This is the eternal wisdom I discovered over a century ago, wisdom that transformed countless lives during my time on Earth, and continues to transform lives today. I am Florence Scovel Shinn, and today, I'm going to share with you the exact rules I discovered, rules that can transform your life, just as they transformed mine and those of my students. But first, if you're ready to stop playing life on hard mode and start winning consistently, please subscribe and ring that notification bell. Because by the end of our time together, you'll have the master key to unlock any door in your life. Now, let me share something that shook the very foundation of how I understood existence. During my years as a metaphysical teacher in New York, I made a profound discovery. The game of life is a game of boomerangs. Our thoughts, deeds, and words return to us sooner or later with astounding accuracy. Think about that for a moment, dear soul. Everything you're experiencing right now, your relationships, your bank account, your health, your happiness, it's all coming back to you like a boomerang you threw into the universe weeks, months, or even years ago. Have you ever noticed that the same types of problems keep showing up in your life? The same kind of difficult people, the same financial struggles, the same emotional patterns. That's not coincidence, my friend. That's the boomerang effect in action. Let me share something from my own journey. Before I understood these principles, I lived much like most people do, reacting to circumstances, feeling victimized by events, believing that life was happening to me rather than trugh me. I didn't realize that every morning, when I woke up worried about money, every time I spoke words of limitation, every moment I spent in resentment, I was throwing negative boomerangs into my future. Then the Great Awakening came. I discovered that life isn't happening to you. Life is happening to. Every thought is a seed you plant in the garden of your future. Every word is a command to the invisible forces around you, and every action is a vote for the type of person you're becoming. As I always taught, whatever man feels deeply or images clearly is impressed upon the subconscious mind and carried out in minutest detail. Your mind is like fertile soil. It will grow whatever seeds you plant there, whether they be flowers or weeds. During my years of teaching, I discovered that this game of life operates on 4 fundamental rules. Master these 4 rules, and you master your entire existence. Ignore them, and you'll keep struggling, wondering why life seems so unfair to you, while others seem to live charmed lives. The first rule I must share with you is what I call the law of mental equivalence. Your outer world is a perfect reflection of your inner world, dear friend. Most people have this backwards. They believe they must see it to believe it. But I'm here to tell you the truth. You'll see it when you believe it. I always taught my students, you must form the habit of living in the 4th dimension, the world of the wondrous. It is the world where you do not judge by appearances. You see, most people make the mistake of judging everything by what their physical eyes can perceive. But what you see is merely the current snapshot, not the entire story that's unfolding. Let me tell you about one of my students who learned this lesson in the most remarkable way. She was a talented actress who suffered from a terrible skin disease that doctors declared incurable. But here's what happened. She landed a wonderful role in a play. Opening night, she was absolutely brilliant. The critics praised her performance, and she felt incredible joy and success. But the very next day, jealousy reared its ugly head. Another cast member, consumed with envy over her success, had her removed from the production. The devastation she felt was overwhelming. Hatred and resentment began to consume her heart, but in that moment of despair, She cried out, "Oh God, don't let me hate that man." For 3 consecutive nights, she worked in what I call the silence, that deep, quiet place within where divine wisdom resides. She meditated until she found genuine peace with herself, with that jealous man, and with the entire situation. On the 3rd day, something miraculous occurred. She was completely healed of her skin disease. You see, my dear friend, the disease had come from subconscious resentment that she had been carrying. When she released that resentment through forgiveness and love, the physical manifestation simply dissolved. Your body is constantly responding to your thoughts and emotions. It's keeping score of every feeling you hold on to. This brings me to the second fundamental rule, the power of the spoken word. Your words are not mere sounds floating through the air. They are creative forces that actively shape your reality with every utterance. I always reminded my students, there is an old saying that man only dares use his words for 3 purposes: to heal, bless, or prosper. What man says of others will be said of him, and what he wishes for another, he is wishing for himself. During my lifetime, I witnessed the most remarkable transformations, simply through people changing their words. I had a student who constantly declared, "I'm so broke. I can't afford anything." She believed she was simply being honest about her financial situation. But I helped her understand that she was using her words to reinforce and strengthen her poverty consciousness. When she began declaring instead, "Money flows to me easily and abundantly," her entire financial reality began to shift. Within months, she received a promotion, started a profitable side venture, and doubled her income. Same person, same basic skills, but completely different words flowing from her mouth, and therefore different results flowing into her life. You must understand that every word you speak carries vibration, and that vibration goes out into the universe and attracts back to you experiences that match that same vibration. If your words carry the vibration of lack, struggle, and limitation, that's exactly what the universe will deliver to your doorstep. The third rule that governs this game of life might be the most powerful of all: the law of forgiveness. Forgiveness is not about being nice or polite. It's about setting yourself free to receive the abundant good that is rightfully yours. I taught my students, the robbers of time are the past and the future. Man should bless the past and forget it, if it keeps him in bondage, and bless the future, knowing it has in store for him endless joys, but live fully in the now. When you hold on to resentment, anger, or hurt from the past, you're not punishing the person who wronged you. You're building a wall between yourself and your blessings. Every day you spend in resentment is a day you vote for more experiences that will cause you pain. I remember working with a businessman who had been cheated out of thousands of dollars by his partner. He was consumed with thoughts of revenge. His health was deteriorating, and every new business venture seemed to collapse before it could succeed. The anger was literally poisoning his life. I told him firmly, "You must forgive that man and release him completely." He was outraged by my suggestion. "Forgive him. He stole from me. He destroyed my trust." But I explained the deeper truth. Your resentment toward him is a chain that binds you to continued failure and struggle. Every moment you spend hating him, you're creating more experiences that will make you angry. The universe cannot bring you joy while you're clutching so tightly to pain. It took many months of inner work, but eventually this man found genuine forgiveness in his heart. He learned to bless his former partner and release the entire situation to divine justice. The transformation was swift and remarkable. New opportunities began flowing, his health improved dramatically, and his business ventures started thriving. The most beautiful part of this story is that his former partner, having lost everything through his own dishonest actions, eventually came to make amends. But by then, our gentleman was so successful and at peace that the whole situation felt like ancient history. The fourth rule that governs all of life is the law of divine supply. My dear friend, the universe is not a place of lack and limitation. It's an infinite storehouse of abundance, waiting to fulfill your every genuine need and desire. I often gave this treatment for my students. Infinite Spirit opened the way for great abundance for their name He. She is an irresistible magnet for all that belongs to her by divine right. You see, there is no shortage in God's universe. There is no lack in the realm of infinite supply. The only lack exists in human consciousness that has been trained to see limitation, where abundance actually exists. Most people live their entire lives believing in scarcity, that there's not enough money, not enough opportunities, not enough love to go around. This belief becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that creates the very lack they fear. But when you understand divine supply, you realize there's more than enough for everyone, including you. I lived by this principle completely. When I needed money, I didn't worry or scheme about where it would come from. I simply acknowledged that infinite supply was my source, and I remained open to receiving it through whatever channel the universe chose to send it. Money came through my teaching, through unexpected gifts, through opportunities I never could have planned or predicted. When you tap into the consciousness of divine supply, you stop competing with others and start collaborating with the universe. You celebrate other people's success because you know their abundance doesn't diminish yours. It actually demonstrates that the universe loves to pour out blessings on its children. Now that you understand these 4 fundamental rules, let me share with you the daily practices that will help you master this game of life. Every single day presents you with opportunities to apply these principles and throw positive boomerangs into your future. The morning hours are absolutely crucial, dear friend. I always instructed my students, make an affirmation immediately upon waking. For example, "Thy will be done this day." Today is a day of completion. I give thanks for this perfect day. Miracle shall follow miracle and wonders shall never cease. Make this a habit, and one will see wonders and miracles come into his life. The first thoughts you think upon awakening literally set the tone and direction for your entire day. Your mind is most receptive in those precious moments between sleep and full consciousness. Don't waste this golden opportunity by immediately filling your mind with worries, news, or other people's dramas. Instead, before you even open your eyes, speak words of gratitude and expectancy. Thank you, divine intelligence, for this perfect day unfolding before me. I am aligned with infinite wisdom and love. Today I am a magnet for miracles and blessings. Then, as you rise and prepare for your day, visualize it flowing perfectly. See yourself moving through each activity with confidence, grace, and joy. See solutions appearing for any challenges. See supportive people crossing your path. See everything working together for your highest good. Set a clear intention for the day. Today I am an irresistible magnet for all that belongs to me by divine right. I give my best to the world, and the world gives its best to me. Feel the truth of these words in your heart as you speak them. The evening hours are equally important for consolidating the day's lessons and preparing for tomorrow's victories. Before you sleep, take time to review your day with gratitude and wisdom. Instead of replaying problems and failures, bless everything that occurred and look for the hidden gifts in every experience. I taught my students, if you run away, your problems will run after you. Be undisturbed by a situation, and it will fall away of its own weight. Even the challenging experiences of your day have served you in some way. Perhaps they taught you patience, or showed you what you don't want, or prepared you for something better that's coming. This practice of blessing your entire day, the good and the difficult alike, trains your mind to look for lessons and blessings, instead of reasons to feel victimized. You begin to see that everything is working together for your growth and ultimate good. Now let me share with you more deeply about what I consider the master key to this entire game. The boomerang principle. Every thought you think, every word you speak, every action you take is like throwing a boomerang into your future. Most people don't realize they're doing this constantly. So they keep throwing negative boomerangs and wondering why difficult things keep returning to their experience. Consider your thoughts as boomerangs for a moment. If you spend your day thinking thoughts of worry, lack, criticism, and fear, you're throwing those vibrations out into the universe. And the universe, being perfectly just and responsive, must return experiences that match those same vibrations. This is not punishment. This is simply how the law works, as precisely as gravity. But when you consciously choose thoughts of gratitude, abundance, love, and possibility, you throw entirely different boomerangs. The universe responds by bringing you experiences that match these higher vibrations. Supportive people, unexpected opportunities, solutions to problems, moments of joy and success. I once knew a person who complained about everything: the weather, traffic, coworkers, family members, the government. They thought they were simply observing reality and speaking truthfully about their experience. But I could see they were throwing complaint boomerangs all day long, every day. And indeed, their life was filled with things to complain about. Difficult customers appeared regularly in their work. Friends proved unreliable. Their car broke down frequently. Health problems emerged. They believed they were simply unlucky, but they were actually creating their experience through their habitual thought and speech patterns. When I taught them about the boomerang principle, and they began consciously throwing gratitude and appreciation boomerangs instead, their entire world transformed. Same job, same city, same basic circumstances, but suddenly life became much more pleasant and supportive. The difficult people either changed their behavior or naturally faded from their experience, while helpful, kind people began appearing everywhere. Your words are particularly powerful boomerangs because they carry not only your mental vibration, but also the creative power of sound itself. I always taught, if you do not run your subconscious mind yourself, someone else will run it for you. Your subconscious mind is constantly listening to your words and accepting them as instructions for what to create in your life. When you declare, I can never get ahead financially, your subconscious works diligently to make sure that remains true. When you say, I never have enough time, your subconscious creates experiences of time scarcity and overwhelm. But when you consciously choose to speak words of power and possibility, money flows to me easily from multiple sources. I have perfect divine timing in all my affairs. Am blessed with vibrant health and energy. Your subconscious begins working to make these declarations your lived reality. I had a student who used to declare regularly, I have such terrible luck with money. And she certainly did. Every time money came into her hands, something would happen to take it away. Unexpected bills, repairs, emergencies, other people's crises that required her financial help. She couldn't understand why money never stayed with her. I taught her to change her declaration to, I am blessed with divine abundance. Money comes to me easily and remains with me safely. I am a wise steward of all the prosperity that flows through my life. She had to practice this new language consistently, catching herself every time the old limiting words tried to emerge from habit. Within a few months, not only did more money begin flowing into her life, but those mysterious financial emergencies stopped occurring. Her relationship with money completely transformed, because her words had reprogrammed her subconscious expectations and her energetic vibration around prosperity. Your actions are also boomerangs that return to you multiplied. Every kind deed, every moment of service, every act of generosity sends loving energy into the world that must return to you in some form. Conversely, every act of selfishness, dishonesty, or harm creates negative energy that will eventually find its way back to your experience. I always taught. A keen observer of life once said, "No man can fail if some one person sees him successful." Such is the power of the vision, and many a great man owed his success to a wife, or sister, or a friend who believed in him, and held without wavering to the perfect pattern. When you genuinely support others' success and happiness, when you celebrate their victories, as enthusiastically as you would your own, you create a powerful positive boomerang. The universe responds by sending people into your life who support and celebrate your success in return. This is not mere wishful thinking. This is a precise spiritual law that operates as reliably as any physical law. I've witnessed it countless times in my own life and in the lives of my students. When you give love, you receive love. When you give appreciation, you receive appreciation. When you give generosity, abundance flows back to you through channels you never could have anticipated. But there are obstacles that can interfere with your mastery of this game, and I must warn you about them, so you can avoid these common traps that keep people struggling unnecessarily. The first major obstacle is living by appearances alone. I taught my students, you must form the habit of living in the fourth dimension, the world of the wondrous. It is the world where you do not judge by appearances. Most people make their decisions and form their beliefs based entirely on what they can see with their physical eyes. But this is like judging an entire book by reading only one page, or determining the outcome of a game by looking at the score in the first inning. What you see in your current circumstances is simply a temporary reflection of past thoughts, words, and actions. It's not a prediction of your future, unless you allow it to be. When you understand this truth, you can look beyond present appearances to the greater possibilities that exist in the invisible realm of potential. I remember when I was building my teaching work in New York. There were periods when attendance at my lectures was small, when students couldn't afford to pay much for my services, when it appeared that my mission was failing. By all physical appearances, I should have given up and found more conventional employment. But I had learned to look beyond appearances, to the spiritual reality. I could feel the truth and power of these principles in my own heart. I knew they were helping people transform their lives. I trusted that if I continued to serve faithfully, the universe would provide everything needed for this work to flourish. And indeed, my persistence through those challenging periods was preparing me for greater success than I had originally envisioned. The small groups of early students became my most dedicated supporters. The financial struggles taught me to rely completely on divine supply rather than human planning. What looked like failure was actually advanced training for the expanded work that was coming. The second obstacle that trips up many sincere seekers is trying to control exactly how their good will manifest. They become so attached to specific methods and timelines that they actually block the very blessings they're trying to create. I often said, there is no there. There is only here. This means that your good exists right now in the realm of infinite possibility, but it may come to you through paths you never expected or planned. When you insist that it must come through a particular person, job, or opportunity, you limit the universe's ability to serve you. I wanted to expand my teaching work and reach more people with these life-changing principles. I had a very specific plan in mind. I would write more books, perhaps start a magazine, maybe open a larger meeting space in a prestigious location. I kept waiting for investors or publishers to appear who would fund these particular plans. But the universe had a better idea. Students began sharing my teachings with their friends and family. Word of mouth spread in ways I never could have orchestrated. People started traveling from other cities to attend my lectures. My influence expanded far beyond what my limited human plans could have achieved, and it happened through organic growth rather than forced effort. When I released my attachment to the specific how and trusted divine intelligence to orchestrate the details, my work flourished in ways that exceeded my original vision. The key was staying focused on the what, my desire to help people transform their lives, while remaining flexible about the how. The third obstacle that derails many people is impatience combined with doubt. They expect instant results, and when dramatic changes don't appear immediately, they conclude that the principles don't work and abandon their practice. I always reminded my students, do not neglect the day of small things, for little beginnings have big endings. The most profound transformations often happen gradually, like the growth of a mighty oak tree from a tiny acorn. There's a story I love about a man who planted bamboo seeds in his garden. He watered them faithfully every day, tended them with care, but for 3 full years, nothing appeared above the surface of the soil. His neighbors mocked him for wasting time and effort on empty dirt. But in the 4th year, the bamboo suddenly shot up 30 feet in just 6 weeks. It wasn't that nothing had been happening for 3 years. During that entire time, the bamboo was developing a massive, strong root system that could support its eventual rapid, dramatic growth. Your dreams and goals develop in exactly the same way. The period when it appears that nothing is happening, when you're practicing these principles faithfully, but don't see major external changes yet, is actually the most crucial time. During this preparation phase, you're developing the inner strength, wisdom, and character that will allow you to handle the success that's coming. Many people give up during this invisible preparation period because they're judging their progress by external appearances only. But if you could see into the spiritual realm, you would see tremendous activity, old limiting patterns being dissolved, new neural pathways being formed in your brain, your energy field being transformed to attract different experiences. Trust the process, dear friend. Trust that every day you apply these principles consistently, you're building momentum in the invisible realm that will eventually produce visible results beyond what you can currently imagine. Once you've mastered these basic principles, there are advanced strategies that can accelerate your results and help you play at an even higher level of effectiveness. The first advanced strategy is developing what I call a definite purpose. Vague desires produce vague results, but crystal, clear intentions activate the full creative power of the universe in your favor. Most people walk through life with fuzzy goals like, I want to be successful, or I'd like to be happy, or I hope things work out. But the universe responds to precision and clarity. When you know exactly what you want and why you want it, every force in creation begins working to bring it to pass. You must be specific not only about what you desire, but also about the spirit in which you want to achieve it. I always taught that any goal motivated by love, service, and genuine contribution will be supported by infinite intelligence. Goals motivated primarily by ego, fear, or the desire to prove superiority will meet with resistance and struggle. Take time to clarify your deepest desires and write them down in precise, positive language. Instead of, I don't want to be poor, declare, I enjoy abundant prosperity that allows me to live generously and serve others joyfully. Instead of, I can find someone to love me. Affirm, I attract and maintain people who appreciate my unique gifts. The second advanced strategy is the conscious use of mental imagery. I taught, whatever man feels deeply or images clearly is impressed upon the subconscious mind and carried out in minutest detail. Your imagination is not just idle daydreaming, it's a powerful creative tool that literally shapes your future experiences. When you visualize your desired outcomes with vivid detail and genuine emotion, you're programming your subconscious mind to notice opportunities and guide you toward actions that will manifest those images in your physical reality. Spend time each day in quiet visualization. See yourself living your ideal life in rich, colorful detail. See yourself confident and successful in your work. See yourself surrounded by loving relationships. See yourself healthy, happy, and making a positive difference in the world. Make these mental movies so vivid and emotionally compelling that they feel more real than your current circumstances. But remember, visualization is not about fantasizing to escape reality. It's about clarifying and energizing your intentions so that you take inspired action toward their fulfillment. After each visualization session, pay attention to the ideas, opportunities, and impulses that come to you, and act on them with faith and enthusiasm. The third advanced strategy is what I call the gratitude multiplier. Gratitude is not just a pleasant emotion, it's a powerful manifesting force that accelerates the return of your positive boomerangs. I taught. The only person to change is yourself. As you change, all the conditions around you will change. People will change. When you are undisturbed by a situation, it falls away of its own weight. Gratitude shifts your focus from what appears to be missing in your life to the abundance that already surrounds you. This shift in focus literally changes your brain chemistry and the energetic vibration you emit, which attracts more experiences worthy of gratitude. But here's the advanced technique. Don't just be grateful for what you already have. Begin expressing gratitude for what you desire, as if you had already received it. This demonstrates faith to the universe and creates a powerful expectancy that draws your desires toward you. Each morning, spend time being grateful in advance. I'm grateful for my thriving work that serves many people and provides abundant income. I'm grateful for my loving family relationships. I'm grateful for my vibrant health and energy. I'm grateful for the wonderful opportunities that are flowing into my life today. This may feel strange at first. Being grateful for things that haven't yet appeared in your physical experience. But remember, everything exists first in the realm of possibility before it manifests in the physical world. By being grateful in advance, you're claiming your good from that realm of infinite potential. Now you may be wondering, how long does it take for these principles to start working in my life? Based on my years of teaching and observation, transformation happens in predictable stages that I want to share with you. The first stage, which typically lasts about a week, is what I call the awareness phase. This is when you begin to recognize how these universal laws have been operating in your life, often unconsciously. You start to see the connections between your past thoughts, words, and actions and your current circumstances. This awareness can be uncomfortable at first, because you realize how often you've been working against yourself. You might feel regret about wasted years, or embarrassment about limiting beliefs you've held. But I want you to know that this discomfort is actually a very positive sign. It means you're waking up to your true power and potential. The second stage, lasting roughly the first month, is the practice phase. This is when you begin consciously applying these principles, even though it feels awkward and unnatural. Your old mental patterns have tremendous momentum. They want to keep running automatically without conscious interference. During this phase, you'll need to catch yourself many times each day. You'll start to say something limiting and stop yourself mid-sentence to rephrase it more positively. You'll notice negative thoughts arising and consciously choose different thoughts. You'll feel like you're learning a completely new language. The language of possibility rather than limitation. Be patient with yourself during this phase. Change takes time and repetition. Every time you choose a positive thought over a negative one, every time you speak words of faith instead of fear, you're literally rewiring your brain and establishing new neural pathways that will eventually become automatic. The third stage, occurring roughly between days 30 and 90, is what I call the momentum phase. This is when the magic really starts happening visibly. Your new mental patterns begin creating new experiences in your outer world, which in turn reinforces and strengthens your new patterns. During this phase, you'll start noticing that positive opportunities appear more frequently. Conversations with others flow more easily and productively. Problems seem to resolve themselves more quickly. You feel more confident, optimistic, and capable of handling whatever life brings your way. This is when many people become truly convinced that these principles work, because they have personal evidence from their own experience. Success begins to build upon itself as your increased confidence attracts even better opportunities and relationships. The fourth stage, extending through your first year and beyond, is the integration phase. This is when these principles become your new normal way of thinking, speaking, and being in the world. You no longer have to consciously remember to apply them. They've become your natural, automatic responses to life. During this phase, you stop being someone who's trying to apply positive thinking and become someone who naturally lives from a place of faith, gratitude, and expectancy. You've developed what I call divine confidence, the unshakable knowing that the universe is always working for your highest good, even when you can't see how. Challenges still arise, of course, but you meet them with curiosity rather than anxiety. You've learned to see obstacles as opportunities for growth and creativity. You trust the process of life completely, because you've experienced firsthand how everything ultimately works together for good when you align yourself with these universal principles. As our time together draws to a close, I must warn you about the most common mistakes I've observed that can derail your progress and keep you from experiencing the full power of these teachings. The first mistake is approaching these principles from desperation rather than faith. When you're trying to force results because you're afraid of what will happen if they don't work quickly, you're actually vibrating fear and limitation rather than confidence and abundance. The universe responds to your dominant vibration, not your desperate efforts. Practice these principles from a place of calm certainty, rather than anxious hoping. Know that they work because they're universal laws, as reliable as gravity. Your job is not to make them work. Your job is simply to align yourself with them and allow them to work through you. The second mistake is inconsistent application. Some people get excited about affirmations and visualization, practice them intensely for a few days, then forget about them for weeks, then wonder why they don't see lasting results. These principles require consistency to build momentum. It's better to spend 5 minutes each day practicing them faithfully than to spend 2 hours once a week. Daily practice creates the neural pathways and energetic patterns that transform your life from the inside out. The third mistake is using these principles to fight against what you don't want instead of creating what you do want. If you're constantly affirming, "I don't want to be poor," or "I refuse to be lonely," you're still focusing your mental energy on poverty and loneliness. The universe responds to your focus, regardless of whether you want or don't want what you're focusing on. Always frame your intentions in positive terms. Instead of, "I don't want financial problems," declare, "I enjoy abundant prosperity and financial freedom." Instead of, "I won't let people take advantage of me," affirm, "I attract respectful relationships with people who appreciate and support me." My dear friend, as we reach the end of our journey together today, I want to leave you with the most important truth I ever discovered. The game of life is a game of boomerangs. Our thoughts, deeds, and words return to us sooner or later with astounding accuracy. This means you have incredible power in every moment. You are not a victim of circumstances. You are the architect of your destiny. Every thought you think, every word you speak, every action you take is creating your future experience. The question is not whether these universal laws work. They are always working, just as gravity is always working. The question is whether you will use them consciously and deliberately to create the life of your dreams. Starting right now, in this very moment, you can begin throwing different boomerangs into your future. You can choose thoughts of gratitude instead of complaint, words of possibility instead of limitation, actions of love and service instead of selfishness and fear. I transformed my own life using these exact principles. I went from struggling as a divorced artist to becoming a successful teacher whose work has helped millions of people over the past century. But more importantly, I developed unshakable faith in the goodness of life and the reliability of spiritual law. If this message has opened your eyes to new possibilities, I want to hear about it. Share your thoughts in the comments below and tell me, what's the first boomerang you're going to throw differently starting today? If you're ready to continue learning these life-changing principles, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on. In upcoming videos, we'll explore my other teachings about the power of your spoken word, the secret door to success, and the magical path of intuition. And if you know someone who's struggling with limiting beliefs or feeling stuck in life, please share this message with them. I always believed that when we lift each other up, we all rise together. Your act of sharing could be the boomerang that comes back to you as unexpected blessings in your own life. Remember, dear soul, you are not ordinary. You are a divine being having a human experience, and you have access to infinite intelligence and unlimited creative power. The game of life has rules, and now you know what they are. The question isn't whether these principles will work for you. They are universal laws that work for everyone who applies them consistently and faithfully. The only question is, will you use them to create the abundant, joyful, purposeful life you deserve? As I always taught, no man is your enemy. No man is your friend. Every man is your teacher. Learn from everyone you meet. Bless every experience you have. And trust that everything is working together for your ultimate good. Your time is now. Your moment is here. The universe is waiting to shower you with blessings beyond your wildest dreams. Start playing by the rules that guarantee victory, and watch as your life transforms into the masterpiece it was always meant to become. Until we meet again in spirit, keep throwing positive boomerangs, and remember, you are loved, you are blessed, and you are destined for greatness.